In the spring of the 21st year of King Xerxes' reign, a royal order spread like wildfire through the provinces of the Achaemenid Empire. Every nobleman with a daughter of age was summoned, not for marriage, not for education, but for inspection. The king's officials, cloaked in silence and law, were already traveling eastward, armed not with weapons, but with ledgers and judgment. In the mountain province of Arya, one girl would learn what it meant to be born beautiful in an empire that consumed beauty without mercy. Her name was Aryana, but soon she would not be allowed to speak it. The summons came at dusk, sealed with the black wax of Susa. Aryana's father broke it with shaking fingers, then slumped against the wall without speaking. Her mother read the lines aloud, but the words sounded like a foreign tongue. Aryana watched the sun sink behind the cliffs as her mother began pulling silks from trunks and cutting her hair to fall straighter, smoother. That night, no one ate. Her younger brother wept into the wool mat and was silenced with a hand. By morning, Aryana was bathed, wrapped in crimson, and led to the village square with 6 other girls. Horses waited. Behind them, the royal inspectors, men with flat eyes, trimmed beards, and robes edged in bronze, spoke nothing, not even greetings. One held a scroll, another held a stylus. When Aryana stepped forward, the inspector looked her over like a pot at market. Her name was written, her age estimated. Her father's name was not asked. He no longer mattered. Once the parchment was full, the girls were herded onto the carts like linen to be weighed. Mothers reached for daughters and were blocked. One girl tried to run and was struck to the dirt with a sandal. No blood, just shame. The procession moved slowly through the villages, collecting more names, more silence. When they stopped at night, the girls were not allowed to speak. They slept beside sacks of barley, their fine clothes smelling of animal sweat and dust. Aryana tried to remember her sister's face. She tried to remember the sound of her father praying before dawn, but memory thinned with each mile. After 9 days, they reached a post station lined with white stone. There, their names were taken again, and this time, taken away. Aryana became Asha Set, written in black ink on her arm. She was no longer a daughter. She was a selection. Inside the post station, eunuchs bathed them in oils and gave them gold-threaded gowns that whispered when they walked. The girls looked at one another, searching for someone to cry first. No one did. That was the beginning of something worse than pain. It was transformation without consent. Aryana stood in line, her eyes dry, her mouth closed. She could feel something inside her folding in on itself, the way a parchment folds before burning. She had not yet reached the king's palace, but she had already left her world. The corridor was longer than it should have been. Smooth marble floors reflected the torchlight like still water, but there was no warmth. Just the cold judgment of eyes that had forgotten what it meant to see a person. Aryana stood barefoot, her arms crossed behind her back as instructed, her eyes lowered but open. Above her, a vaulted ceiling arched like the belly of a tomb, and all around her, silence throbbed like a second heartbeat. She was one of 30 girls lined up for the inspection. None spoke, none wept. They had learned quickly that emotion was unwelcome here. The first girl was summoned. She disappeared behind a curtain of indigo cloth. A eunuch emerged minutes later with a quiet nod, and the next was taken. Aryana watched their faces as they returned, some pale and rigid, others trembling with barely suppressed fear. One returned with her veil stained from where she had bitten her lip to keep from crying. When Aryana's turn came, the marble was colder than she imagined. The eunuch who led her had a face that looked carved from salt, wrinkled and bleached with years of ritual and detachment. Inside the chamber, 3 figures sat on low stools, one with a stylus, one with a wax tablet, and one with nothing but a gaze. That was the one who mattered. He did not speak. He raised one hand, and Aryana stopped in front of him. Her robe was lifted from her shoulders, slowly, ceremonially, until it puddled at her feet. She was told to turn. She did. The man's gaze never moved from her. He examined her hips, her back, her arms. A slave girl stepped forward and unbraided Aryana's hair, letting it fall in a curtain of black. Her teeth were inspected. Her hands stretched out to show that her fingers were unbent, unmarred. The silence pressed in. Every movement was recorded: height, symmetry, skin, weight, hair, scars. A slight hesitation and the inspector's quill paused. Aryana forced her breath to stay quiet, shallow. She had never been so naked, yet so invisible. After a long pause, the man flicked his fingers. The robe was replaced. The eunuch nodded. No words had been spoken. But she had passed. Others were not so fortunate. One girl fainted. One flinched and was struck. Another, with a birthmark across her ribs, was escorted out and would not return. Aryana walked back to the corridor, her face expressionless, her limbs obedient. Inside, something had sunk deeper. She was not Aryana anymore. She was a selection, a form, a measurement in a system so large and ancient it had no room for grief. The corridor closed behind her like a mouth swallowing light, and she walked back to the line, as silent as before, as if nothing had happened. The name they gave her was not hers. Asha Set, they said, and it was sewn into her bedding, inked onto her brush handle, whispered at her back by women who had learned not to ask questions. In the women's quarter, names were chosen for how easily they could be forgotten. Aryana did not speak unless spoken to, and even then, she used the voice they had trained her to use, soft, rounded, never rising. A tutor from Elam taught them how to sit, how to smile without teeth, how to eat dates without showing hunger. They were not being educated, they were being erased. The palace compound smelled of cedar oil and powdered rose petals. The air was clean but empty, as if the wind had been told not to disturb the order. Girls were kept in groups according to category. Those who had been chosen already were kept separate, guarded by tighter walls and older eunuchs. The ones like Aryana, who had passed inspection but had not yet been summoned, floated in the in-between, a group called the Veiled, not favored, not discarded, merely waiting, and in waiting, they unraveled. One girl, tall and quiet, with skin like polished brass, whispered one night that she had once been promised to a merchant's son before the inspectors came. Another, younger and sharper-eyed, had come from the mountains and did not believe in crying. She scratched her name into a soapstone tile until her fingers bled. Aryana said nothing. She watched. She memorized the rules faster than anyone. Never be first to speak. Never leave food on your plate. Never ask about the outside world. The walls listened. The guards did not smile. Every week, new silks arrived. The girls were measured and fitted and perfumed until their skin no longer smelled like themselves. They were bathed by other women, older ones, bitter-eyed and silent, who had once been veiled too, until time made them permanent shadows in the system. Aryana spent her nights staring at the lattice ceiling above her bed, watching the moonlight trace across the carved beams. In the silence, she thought of her mother's hands, the weight of her brother's sleeping head against her shoulder, the sound of goats bleating at sunrise. But even those memories began to feel distant, as if they belonged to someone else. One evening, a woman named Atosa approached her. She wore no veil, no paint. Her eyes were heavy with something unreadable. "Forget your old name," she said. "It's dangerous here." Aryana nodded. She had already begun to forget the shape of it on her tongue. Here, in the palace without names, survival was not about beauty. It was about vanishing so well that no one noticed you were still alive. They came for her before the sun rose. 2 eunuchs in white robes opened the door without a sound. Aryana sat up, already dressed. She had known this day would come. The night before, the bathwater had been warmer, the oil more fragrant, the silence around her even heavier than usual. Now, she followed them through the marble corridors of the women's quarter, her bare feet whispering against stone polished by centuries. No one spoke. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them clasped. Weakness was dangerous. Emotion was dangerous. Even the trembling of a lip could mark a girl as unfit. At the end of the corridor stood a chamber lined with low burning lamps. Inside, a row of girls, perhaps 12 in all, stood wrapped in sheer silk dyed in the colors of crushed pomegranate. Their skin gleamed with gold powder dusted across collarbones, foreheads, thighs. Their hair was brushed until it shone like obsidian. They looked like idols, not people. Aryana took her place. The air smelled of myrrh and old tension. Hours passed in silence. One girl swayed and nearly fainted. No one moved to help her. That was not permitted. A woman older, hollow-eyed, veiled in blue, moved from girl to girl, adjusting posture, touching shoulders, removing stray hairs. She never smiled. Aryana's turn came. The woman's fingers were cold. She lifted Aryana's chin, smoothed the silk along her arm, and said, "Do not speak. Do not breathe deeply. If your eyes wander, you will be sent back." Then she moved on. Time lost meaning. The girl stood motionless as the door at the far end opened and the king's procession entered 4 guards, a scribe, a eunuch, and finally the king himself. Aryana had seen his face once before, carved into stone on a palace wall. He was taller than she expected, his beard dark and neatly curled, his robe stitched with lions and suns. He did not speak. He walked slowly, passing each girl, pausing only to nod or shake his head. One girl, barely 15, with trembling lips and 2 thin wrists, was chosen. The scribe wrote quickly. Another, older and fuller-bodied, was dismissed with a flick of the eunuch's hand. Aryana kept her eyes low. When the king paused in front of her, she felt his gaze like weight on her chest, but he said nothing. He moved on. She was not chosen, nor was she dismissed. When the room emptied, a different eunuch approached her. "Outer wing," he said flatly. "You wait." That was her sentence, not favored, not forgotten, only suspended in silence. As she was led from the chamber, past the girl who had been chosen and was now being wrapped in royal blue, Aryana felt something sharp and hollow grow inside her. Not pain, not shame, just the knowledge that in this place, invisibility was a form of survival, and survival had its own cost. The outer wing had no mirrors, no music, no voices above a whisper. It was a wing of waiting, a place where the not chosen were stored, like scrolls not yet read but too valuable to discard. The walls were the same polished stone as the rest of the palace, but here the silence was thicker. The eunuchs who walked the halls carried no tablets. They had memorized the names, the rules, the limits. Aryana was given a room with a low bed, a clay basin, and a view of a wall covered in ivy. The sky could only be seen through a slit in the ceiling, and even that light came in crooked. Every morning, she was brought new clothes, always silk, always gold-threaded, always meaningless. She was taught embroidery, calligraphy, flute, posture. But there was no audience, no purpose, only the quiet expectation that someone, someday, might summon her, or might not. The other women in the outer wing rarely spoke. Some had been there for years. One woman, perhaps in her 30s, had not spoken in so long that her voice had vanished. When she did attempt a word, only breath came out. Another, younger, walked the garden paths every evening in the same pattern, as if retracing something she had forgotten. The days blended. The fruit changed with the seasons, but not the routine. Aryana began to feel herself slipping out of her own edges, like ink bleeding through paper. She thought of her mother sometimes, but even that image had faded. She no longer remembered the exact sound of her brother's laughter, only that it had existed, once. One morning, while she was threading a needle in the pale light, she heard a scream, not loud but real, human. It cut through the silence like a knife. Everyone froze. The woman beside her dropped her embroidery. A eunuch entered within minutes, calm and cold. The girl who had screamed was removed. No one asked why. No one ever returned from removal. The silence afterward was worse than before. That evening, Aryana sat in the garden alone. The jasmine had begun to bloom, but even its sweetness felt heavy. Atossa, the older woman who had warned her months ago, appeared beside her like a shadow. She sat without asking. After a long silence, she said, "This place was not built for women. It was built for what men think women are." Aryana said nothing. Atossa did not need her to. The stars were faint, half hidden by the high walls, but they were there. Aryana tilted her head to look, just for a moment, just to remember what distance felt like. Then she looked back down and folded the feeling into the quiet where no one could reach it. It began with footsteps, not hurried, not loud, just sure. Aryana heard them echo through the corridor before they reached the garden. She was kneeling over a tray of dyed threads, sorting by hue under the filtered sunlight. By now, her fingers moved without thought, her eyes only half watching. But the silence changed. It grew attentive, as if the walls themselves were listening. The door opened. A eunuch entered, followed by a man in darker robes than the others, embroidered with the seal of the empire, a ring of lions surrounding the royal crest. He did not look at the women. He only handed the eunuch a scroll, murmured instructions, and left. The eunuch turned to the women of the outer wing. His voice was clipped, formal. A new call had come from the king's household, another round of selections. This time, not for himself, but for the sons of satraps, the brothers of generals, the heirs of noble houses. The king was aging, and with his waning interest came delegation. Aryana did not react, neither did the others, but something shifted beneath the quiet. Not hope, never that. Just the tremor of possibility, which was more dangerous than despair. That evening, she sat alone beneath the ivy wall. Her hair was longer now, heavier, her face narrower. She had not looked into a mirror in years, but she knew she had changed. She no longer startled at sounds. Her voice had grown soft from disuse. Her silence had become part of her skin, and still, she remembered, not the faces, not the place she had come from, but the girl she had been. The one who had stepped into the corridor of eyes, who had stood in gold powder and silence, who had watched her own name disappear like breath on cold glass. That girl had not died. She had been buried in silk and routine, but not dead. And tonight, as the stars emerged above the garden slit of sky, Aryana saw her again, not in a mirror, not in a dream, but in another girl, a new one, led in by eunuchs, eyes wide, shoulders tense, breath shallow. Aryana watched her from the shadows. She knew the look, the questions too dangerous to speak, the grief too new to name. The girl sat down on a bench, alone, clutching the hem of her robe like it might save her. Aryana rose, walked slowly, and sat beside her. She did not offer comfort, only presence, only proof that survival was possible. The girl glanced at her, then away. Aryana said nothing. She didn't need to. She had become what the empire never meant her to be, a witness, a mirror, a thread that refused to break. And as the night deepened, she kept her back straight, her silence steady, and her presence unmistakably alive.